Okay, I guess the next slide. Yep. So for today in the webinar, we're just going to provide like a brief overview about what we do, Life Science Nation, a bit about our Resi conferences, the Innovators Pitch Challenge at Resi, what makes a good presentation, tips on pitch materials, and then lastly, preparing for any investor questions. Okay, so a brief overview about Life Science Nation. We've been around for over 12 years, currently headquartered in the Boston area at the CIC. And we primarily help connect early stage life science startups with investors and strategic partners. We're actually trying to expand outside of that early stage, but for most of the years that the company has been around, it's been focused on early stage investments and startups. And we do this three different ways. So first way is we actually sell an investor database and business development database, so two separate databases. The investor database, it comprises of over 3,000 investment firms, 10,000 contacts. And similar to any other database, you can filter it out based on your technology and stage of development, and even filter out for investor types. So we track 10 categories of investors like VCs, angels, family offices, all of that. And then the second way we do this type of facilitation with like connecting early stage startups with investors is through our Resi conferences. So we actually last month during Resi JPM in San Francisco, that was our 50th Resi. So pretty exciting about that. And yeah, for Resi conferences, we host it 5 times per year. Next one is going to be in Barcelona, April 1st through April 3rd. Partnering with an organization called BioCat. So it's pretty cool. And then the one after that will be during the same week as Bio in June 16th through 18th. And then right after that in September, we're going to be in Boston again on September 17th through 19th. And then lastly, for the last Resi of this year, we're going to be in London in December, 4th through 6th. In case you miss any of that, it'll be on the Resi website, but we can link it in the chat as well.
Awesome.
And then we also, yep,
So I
Max,
was
you
going to
want to?
say, just to tie it in a little bit better, the Resi Partnering Conference is unique because we work with early stage companies and investors. And what's unique is we're pretty thorough in the way that we vet these investors. So each investor that attends the conference, we actually require them to get on the phone with our team, and they do a one-on-one interview. And in that interview, it lets us get a really in-depth look at their fund because A, it lets us make sure that they are a legit investor, and that they're representing an active fund. But B, it also lets us get a really in-depth look at that fund-specific thesis. So again, Erica had mentioned it earlier, but we work with 10 different types of investors. And every single type of those, whether it's an angel, a family office, or a VC group, they're going to follow some sort of investment thesis, which will guide them in their decision making. Obviously, some groups have a little bit more flexibility than others, but we've always found that every type of investor will follow some sort of outline. And our team actually gets to interview them to find out exactly what that thesis, or we call it an investor mandate, composes. So that is the information that is curated and put into our investor database. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Sorry to interrupt, Erica, but yeah, the two tie in really well together.
All good. And just a quick, like someone asked a question in the chat, what's the difference between all the Resi conferences and are the group of investors different? So for the Resi conferences, they're pretty much the same. So there's going to be like one-on-one partnering platform. There's going to be investor-led panels, a pitch competition called Innovators Pitch Challenge. There's going to be exhibition and workshops, and also a networking reception right after the Resi conference. And in terms of, yeah, the group of investors are different. So as Max mentioned, we do check 10 categories, so like angels, family offices, private equity, CVC, VC, all of that.
So the
You
format
can
itself
go
is the
into more
same.
detail.
The
Yeah.
format itself is the same. Obviously, the actual programming, like the investor panels, the workshops, all of that content is different, as well as, of course, the attendees. And we've always
Yeah.
found that, yes, we have some loyal investors and some loyal companies who follow us everywhere we go. And that is really the best way to do it. But we've been pleasantly surprised by, obviously, when we go out to Europe, we have a lot more European-based investors who are there looking to invest in North American companies, or we have North American investors coming to look for European companies. And there is a really great opportunity for cross-border investments there, but we've always been surprised by the amount of difference we actually see in attendees, which is a good thing.
Yep. And then lastly is the entrepreneurial education courses. So on our website, you can actually purchase a few courses that we've created, targeting around like how to tell your story, tips about fundraising, all of that. And in terms of cohorts, this year we're actually working with the Australian and Brazilian government, and they're sending about, I think, like 10 to 15 startups, and we're helping them with their pitch deck and for them to prepare to attend Resi, as well as, I believe, a government organization in South Korea. But in the past, we've worked with the NIA, National Institute of Aging, and a bunch of other organizations too. Next slide. Okay, so knowing your audience. So of course, when you're pitching, it's not just I mean, it's obviously going to be investors, but you're also going to pitch to other founders and just a bunch of other people that you're going to be pitching to. So for us, again, angels, corporate VCs, endowments, foundations, family offices, government organizations, large pharma, PE, VC. These are all types of investors that attend our conferences, and you can actually understand like, oh, like which category they're part of, because we will group that. We'll group them in the partnering platform at the Resi conferences, as well as our investor database. And you can just see like, oh, sorry.
There you go.
See like just a few investors that have attended in the past. And we always publish the investor list and company list on our Resi website. So in case you are interested in any Resi in the future, we just make sure to check the website for that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We have a list of all of the attending investors. There's like a snapshot of some of the highlighted ones, but we kind of have the luxury of being really transparent with who comes. We have a great group of investors that always attends. We always post that information directly on our website. For both Europe and our upcoming Boston events, be sure to go and click on there, and you can see some of the attending investors that are already registered.
Yep. And then for this slide, it just provides an overview about who attends Resi conferences. So I would like to say it's a pretty good split between the investor attendees and also the startup attendees, as well as any service providers. The majority of startup investors that come to Resi, they are focused on therapeutics, but we do have like medical device investors, digital health, diagnostics, and even R&D services investors. A lot of the investors are VC firms, but since we are also focused on early stage funding, a lot of angels and family offices will attend as well, both angel groups, individual investors, and yeah, family offices.
Yeah, so
And
we
then, yeah,
Sorry,
Max,
I was
yeah.
gonna say we have historically been we would always say seed through Series B. We're starting to welcome both later stage investors and later stage companies. But when we say that, we would say it with the caveat that seed would be 1 to 2 million, Series A 2 to 10, Series B 10 to 50. And you can put whatever name on the round that you want, but really the check size is kind of the primary thing, the driving factor of it. So really anything under 50 million, we see a lot of our investors kind of in that sweet spot. Anything above that, there's still a really great opportunity, not just to come and connect with investors, but there's a lot of increased syndication that we see going on where investors can syndicate and join around together. So I would not let it discourage you. I know a lot of the people in attendance today are probably under that 50 million point. But again, if you're over it, there is certainly the opportunity to come connect with investors that can still be a part of your round.
Yep. And
Anything else you want
then,
to add, Erica?
no, we
Cool.
can go to the next slide.
Awesome. So that brings us to the next slide, which is a little bit more focused on Resi Europe 2025. So as Erica had mentioned earlier, all of the conferences are going to be 1 day in person, followed by 2 days of virtual partnering. And yes, there are options. I saw the question earlier. There are options to participate virtually only. And that way you can still leverage the opportunity to connect with all of the attending investors and book meetings with them. But the in-person day includes also the programming. So our team puts together, and we always do, it looks like 7 sessions here. These are expert investor panelists who it will typically be between 4 to 5 investors on the panel, and they will talk about different themes, both within the early stage funding, tips on how to get funded, how to approach investors. And we always, when we recruit these investors, we do so hoping that they can give information specifically to the audience. So we set prep calls ahead of time. We let them know kind of who our best audience is and how they can filter the message in a way that's actually beneficial to you guys, who I'm assuming a majority of you guys are going to be company attendees, maybe CEOs and founders yourselves. But these investors will touch on specifically what it is you need to know in order to navigate the fundraising campaign. So here you can see obviously the lineup for Resi Europe. It's also available on our website. Um, and I will pivot to the Innovators Pitch Challenge. So we call it the IPC. It is a huge component of our Resi conferences. And what it is exactly what it sounds like, the pitch challenge. So we typically have about 56 pitching companies per conference. And it is unique because what we do is rather than just giving you guys a room and hoping for attendees to show up and giving you a minute or two to talk about your company, we put a lot of effort into creating what we call a dynamic event. So we put together 4 or 5 expert investor judges who are sector specific, meaning that not only do they have a background in the specific sector that your technology is in, but most importantly, they are also representing a investment fund who invests within that area. So you get the opportunity to participate in this pitch. It is a 6-minute pitch and a 7-minute session of Q&A where you can go talk about your company, your technology, and other factors that will actually is kind of the focus of this webinar, and we'll dive into it a little bit further, but it's how do you do a pitch? Um, but the IPC is a great opportunity. Obviously, not only do you get to attend Resi and participate and network with the attending investors, but this is just increased brand exposure, and it's really what we found to be the best way to actually take advantage of Resi, get exposure to these attending investors, and participate that way. I had mentioned it a second ago, but we do group it together by sector. So we encourage all life science sectors to participate. We will do therapeutic sectors, medical devices, diagnostics, digital health, and then R&D services. And again, this is just at the bottom there. The seed, Series A or Series B is just really the sweet spot of attending investors. Um, And so when you apply, we will have you guys fill out a questionnaire. And the reason we do this is actually pretty unique. We know that a 13-minute pitch goes very quickly. We actually used to just do, it's a 6-minute pitch, 7 minutes of Q&A, and we used to do it shorter. So we've extended the time now to give you guys a little bit longer to actually explain your technologies more thoroughly. But what we do is once this application is filled out, we use it on our end to make sure that we are accurately assigning sectors and recruiting judges based on your specific technologies. But we will also send this information to the investor judges ahead of time. That way they can skim through your company. We ask you to also upload as you see your logo, your pitch deck, your executive summary, and a headshot. That way the attending investors who are going to be participating as judges and panelists for your sessions can look at your company ahead of time and they'll have somewhat of an understanding of to what to expect rather than being completely thrown off. And that means that yes, the 6-minute pitch is quick, but they will have some sort of background knowledge so that way they're not starting from zero. And so the format, I know I've touched on it a little bit, but pitching startups will receive a 3-day ticket. So that is access to both the in-person day, which for Resi Europe is going to be April 1st, and then the 2 virtual days that follow. So again, Resi Europe in person April 1st, virtual partnering on the 2nd and 3rd. So pitching companies get access to all 3 days of partnering. Obviously, they also get access to the in-person pitching slot, which includes not just the investor judges, but also the room typically fills up pretty quickly of other investors. And we promote it very thoroughly through our social medias, through the program guide and everything. And that way, if an investor is investing in your session, it's easy for them to see. They'll come to your session, and typically we see that the rooms fill with both other investors and strategic partners as well. So you'll get access to pitching to that room, and you'll also get access to an exhibition table and a poster space. We implemented this for the first time last year, not the poster, but the table at Resi Boston, and we saw that it worked really, really well at getting increased exposure. So we put all of the pitching companies in the main foyer, and we give you guys a 3-foot exhibition table, which comes with a poster space. That way you can include things like your executive summary and your pitch deck, your tear sheet handout, and all of the investors who are going to be navigating that room, walking in and out of partnering, are going to pass by your poster. You're going to get the opportunity to catch them, discuss with them, and it's really easy for you to say, "Hey, what areas do you invest in? Come with me to my poster, and I'll tell you more about my company." So obviously, you get access to that as well. All of the investor judges also fill out a score sheet. Not only do you get scored, but they provide comments, which we obviously send out afterwards. That way, you get really, really quality feedback, and you can refine your pitch based off of that feedback. So we group 4 startups per hour. So 13 minutes per the pitching session as well as the Q&A. So you'll get grouped 4 companies per 1 hour session, and all of the attendees, all of the companies and the judges get what we call Resi Cash. And what that is we've kind of gamified the process a little bit, which encourages attendees to not only go listen to all the pitches and navigate the posters, because what they do is when they register and they sign in at the front desk, they get 5 pieces of Resi Cash. And they then get to go vote at your posters for whichever company they find the most compelling. And then if your company is a winner, the top 3 winners will get future free Resi tickets. Yeah, and again, this is just touching a little bit more specifically on the Resi Cash, but we found it's a really fun way to encourage not only companies actually interacting as well as investor interaction, but it does give you really good feedback on how you did. And again, those winners are announced during the cocktail reception that takes place from 5 to 7. So why participate? Obviously, we touched on a lot of this a second ago, but it is a really, really great way of maximizing your time at Resi. Increased visibility is huge, especially with that table component. But it's not just a table. We also feature you on our website. We'll feature you on all of our LinkedIn posts. And the finalists also will be announced both within our LSN newsletter and social medias. But they get blasted in, again, this next phase newsletter. This goes out every week to over 50,000 in readership, composed not just of companies, but also investors who have subscribed. And we will send it out there. We will highlight both the finalists and we also highlight the winners after the conference, which is just another great opportunity for your company and your name to get exposure to our whole network, which is huge, over 50,000 in readership. And then lastly, we will now start to talk a little bit more about what do you actually say and do when you're pitching, and how do you structure that pitch. So 6 minutes is quick, but these are the core components that we think need to be touched on, and none of them should, spend too much time on them, but it is important to highlight all of them. So obviously, you want to address the unmet need and market size, but you don't have to do much more than just really addressing this. A lot of times, we will see companies go up there and they will spend 3 to 4 minutes talking about their TAM, their SAM, and their whole market. And frankly, we know that the markets are huge out there, and that's also why we send that material to the judges ahead of time, so that they're aware of it. We would rather you guys spend a lot of your time focusing on a quick overview of the technology, make sure that you address the differentiation and competitive landscape. That is a huge slide because it shows that you are aware of the market, you're aware of the situation, and that you've done your research. And every company out there, whether you are a new technology, a completely innovative technology, you will have some sort of competition. So we always say that it is the biggest red flag when you guys go up and say, we have no competition, we are completely unique. Again, of course, your technology probably is differentiated in some aspect, but that does not mean you don't have competition. It is actually a great opportunity for you guys to address what you do better than your competition. So we always recommend including a slide overviewing the ecosystem that you guys play within. Obviously, we want you to touch as well on some of the milestones you achieved, whether it be funding to date in previous rounds, clinical trial progression, any data that you guys have been able to support or plan on supporting. And then also, we want to choose one theme to highlight throughout your company, whether that be management team or previous milestones. We recommend definitely including your management team. That is a huge component, especially at this early stage. A lot of these investors really are aware of the fact that technology pivots, and they prefer to see a strong management team that may have previous experience and they know how to navigate the landscape.
Yep, and just to provide some more details about your messaging and just pitching overall, first tip is to obviously clearly describe your technology. So this means providing like a brief or non-technical explanation of what your product or service does. and without being overly scientific, unless your audience will understand all of those scientific terms. When you're pitching to investors at the Resi conferences, investors can come from a background of like finance or have a PhD, but I think still a non-technical overview is best, and the investors can still ask further questions in the Q&A session. But just to break it down into like three simple terms, and I think Max had mentioned this too, but of course, number one, explain the problem your technology addresses. Number two, how it solves that problem and what the market size is. And number three, explain what your technology, how explain what sets your technology apart from competitors and why your product is a better solution. So, as an example of a pitch tagline, instead of saying, my company has proprietary treatment for many critical illnesses, which is like pretty vague and just doesn't really explain about your startup, it would be much better to say, we're developing an IND ready small molecule asset for breast cancer by activating natural killer cells. Still, that's pretty brief, but yeah, you get the idea of like what to include in like a pitch tagline. And it is a brief statement, but you can always add more to your technology overview with like the 3 points that we mentioned. And then another part about tip number one is to be realistic with your statements. So there's no doubt that your technology will be the next big thing, but make sure to be true to your words and don't overpromise. So here you can, address any risk, whether that's technical, regulatory, etc., that your technology will face, and explain how you plan to overcome them. And make sure just to be realistic about any timelines and milestones because you want whoever you're pitching to advocate for your technology to any senior decision makers and just overall just highlight how your technology is different and why it's better than the competitors.
Yeah. And I guess to maybe take a step back too and retouch on the tagline that Eric had mentioned up above. If you were a company and you go talk to an investor and you say, my company has a proprietary treatment for many critical illnesses. They would have no idea what the sector is. Are you a therapeutic? Are you a digital health? Are you a device? They'd have no idea. They'd have no idea the indication that you treat or the subsector and the modality in which you actually operate. So that is a slogan. It is not a tagline or an elevator pitch. The purpose and the key fundamental aspect that we're actually trying to achieve with the tagline is make it very clear what you do, because the investor will know whether or not you are in scope for them and their thesis or out of scope. And you want to make it as clear as possible. That way you can get the meeting. That is kind of the key is you want to secure a meeting and you want to entice them to actually have that meeting. And once you get that and start discussing with them a little bit more thoroughly, that's when you can explain your technology in obviously more depth than just one or two sentences. But you want to quickly share what it is you do, how you do it, and that way they'll know whether or not you're in scope or out of scope. And that brings us to messaging tip number two. Explain your current company status in detail. And what we mean by that is the ability to provide a strategic direction of your company. That has a lot to do with where you guys stand, whether it be in terms of stage of development as a company, what does your management team look like, and truthfully, just showing that you have an idea of where you are going. And importantly, with the milestones that you need to meet. One of the things that we recommend to all companies is to have a Gantt chart that will show visually on one page where you are aligned in terms of how much funding you are seeking, what that funding will get you, and the timeline in which you plan to do it. So if you're going to go up there and you're going to ask for anywhere from $5 to $10 million, it is important for you to be able to show exactly what you plan on doing with that money. Whether it be to progress in clinical trials, to hire a full-time business person, a new CEO, to possibly replace the founder or whatever. It is important that you make that very clear. Um, yeah, and again, it's important to make that as clear as possible. It's also really important to provide details on previous experience of the management team. Again, that is just that's really validating for an investor to hear that. It's not a necessity, but investors prefer to have someone on the team who has experience, whether it be commercialization experience, regulatory experience, or business experience. They want to know that the company has a clear progression of how to advance.
Yep, and then our next few tips. Number three is to summarize any like near-term and long-term strategy. So in terms of like near-term strategy, this means what you plan to achieve in the next 12 to 18 months. You can highlight any key milestones, such as like confirming concept in animal models, preparing for IND application strategies for interacting with the FDA, or any like toxicology, safety studies, etc. You can also summarize any key relationships. So like medical, anything with like medical centers, big pharma, clinical and manufacturing partners. In terms of IP or intellectual property, you can mention how many patent applications you have filed or are planning to file. And just again, when you're pitching at Resi, part of your near-term strategy can include how much you've raised, how much you're looking to raise, and how you will use those funds, as Max mentioned. So maybe you can use the funds for like your preclinical trials or hiring a sales team, but just make sure to mention that in a Gantt chart. That would be pretty helpful. And then in terms of like long-term strategy, this is what you can outline, what you plan to achieve in the next like 3 to 5 years. Obviously, that's a long way down the line, but you can include like any expansions into new markets, any potential exit opportunities, like do you plan to IPO or be acquired, all of that, any future pipeline development and indications, because I think when you're talking to a lot of like investors and just large pharma, they really like innovation. So mentioning any future pipeline development or indication is pretty helpful. And any strategic partnerships. And then for number four, which is our last tip, is just to provide enough information, but don't go overboard. So remember that when you're pitching to investors, you want your technology to be and your vision to be clear and exciting enough for people to advocate for to their bosses. So always have your pitch deck and executive summary handy.
And the last part, and we put a big emphasis on this because, again, we put together a panel of investor judges. So we put a big emphasis on the questions. And answering the questions is a huge opportunity for you guys to show that you are fundamental as a company, fundamental as a management team, and worthwhile for certainly a meeting, due diligence, and possibly investment. That is, again, the theme of the conference is we want you guys to use this as an opportunity to actually receive investment, whether it comes from the panelists or the other investors in the room. It is important to be able to answer those questions effectively. So we will turn it over to 7 minutes of Q&A for the investor judges. And what is it that they ask? So oftentimes this is where they may ask more specifics on the specific technology, whether it be validating the data that you have, if there's any milestones that need to be achieved. We always recommend, particularly for slides or discussion points that may be a little bit heavier on data, having some sort of appendix. And these appendix slides are going to be those that don't actually get placed within the PowerPoint, but are attached on at the end. And that way, if a question does come up, which a lot of times you can predict what questions are going to be asked, you can then cycle back to that question and to that alternative slide and show the data. So if you give in your 6 minute presentation a quick overview of your technology, and then you have a ton of graph data to support it, put that graph at the end of the PowerPoint, even after the thank you slide. That way, if a question arises, you can go in and reference that graph. Also, questions on market and competition, barriers to entry, just more specifics. Again, having a fundamental understanding of this is going to be important far beyond just the pitch. But your ability to articulate that and discuss that with the group of judges is going to be important. You will also probably get asked on regulatory and reimbursement. Again, it is very likely that the investor judges are probably not going to be coming from the same scientific background as you. Some of them may be financial backgrounds. There will all be, we try to make them as senior as possible. So a lot of the investor judges are going to be partners, GPs, or managing partners. So they will have decision-making process, and they're going to be very concerned with regulatory and reimbursement. So a lot more of the fundamentals. So you need to show that you are capable of foreseeing profitability as a path to exit, whether that be an IPO, licensing, an acquisition, or whatever path you plan to go down. It is good not to just show that you have awareness of how you want to do that, but also maybe even having some examples of other competition that has come before you that has taken a similar exit is going to be really beneficial in showing that you guys understand how exactly you plan on providing an ROI for the investors. Awesome.
Yep, and that brings us to the end of the presentation. But if you guys have any questions, put it in the chat. Uh,
Yeah, we're happy to answer any questions too. And just kind of while you guys type your questions, perhaps I can touch a little bit more again on Resi Europe 2025 and Resi Boston. So as an overview, again, I promise we will send a lot of materials via email. That way you can look at it. But Resi Europe, the IPC application is actually this week. So if you guys are interested in pitching at Europe, we highly recommend you get your application in as soon as possible. We will send a follow-up to this with the application link and also probably throw in a little discount code for you guys as well as with Resi Boston. You guys have a bit more time for that, but it is important to register sooner rather than later because that is going to fill up quickly. We are expecting probably between 250 to 300 investors with us in Barcelona. So whether you obviously we want all of you guys to come pitch and be there in person, but even if you can't, take advantage of those investors and partner with them virtually. Again, it's an incredible opportunity to reach out to European investors who are looking for both European and North American technologies. They want to diversify their portfolios. We saw it last year. We're going to see it again this year. They really want to meet companies outside of their region. And for that reason, it is important that you meet investors outside of your own region as well. So both at Resi Europe and Resi Boston 2025.
yep. And Max, can I actually share my screen real quick about, I just want to show them the Resi website and where they can find more information. So just quickly here, this is the Resi webpage, and all of the investors that are registered for the European conference upcoming in April are listed on the website here. So just make sure to go to attendees and click on investors. And yep, you can see who's here right now. And then we also publish the companies that are attending if you're curious about that. But this applies for all the Resi conferences that we have this year. So sometime in April or May, we're probably going to publish the one for our Boston conference. But right now, we only have the European conference. And then if you're interested in learning more about pitching, we have a pitch tab right here for the Innovators Pitch Challenge. It just provides like the frequently asked questions, just overview about what we talked about today. And then in terms of applications, so you can also find that on the Resi website, but we have two open currently, one for Resi Europe and one for Resi Boston. For Resi Europe, the application is due Wednesday, February 19th. So make sure to have that on your calendar. And then for Resi Boston, the deadline for that is Wednesday, May 7th. And it is first come, first serve. So as long as you submit an application, make a payment, you'll be added to the Innovators Pitch Challenge.
Yeah. And I did just include both Erica and I, both of our email addresses in the chat. So please feel free to reach out with us with any questions you may have, any guidance on how to get registered, or if you just want our opinion on maybe some of your materials, we're again more than happy to do so. One final technical thing I will note too is the application will ask for your materials. Do not panic. Those do not have to be the final materials quite yet. So we would recommend getting registered as soon as possible if you want to do it. And if your materials are not quite finalized, do not worry. Just submit something and you guys will have the opportunity to update them as it comes closer to the pitch. So do not let that be the reason why you don't register. Again, we're filling up quickly. So if you want to participate, please do so as soon as possible.